My sister told our parents that and I am actually a dealer. My parents kicked me out of the house at 15, but then I found out. Hey, everyone. I don't usually post here, but I'm at my wit's end, and I need advice. I'm Emily, 15 years old, and recently my family went on what was supposed to be a relaxing vacation to Florida. Instead, it turned into a complete nightmare. It all started with my 12-year-old half-sister, Sophie. To set the scene, we'd rented this big house near the beach, my dad, stepmom, Sophie, and me. At first, everything seemed fine. My dad had planned for us to hit the theme parks, spend some time at the beach, and just enjoy ourselves. But Sophie and I have never gotten along. She's always been the golden child in my dad's eyes. She's the type who'll pout until she gets what she wants, while I'm left feeling like the afterthought. Things escalated one afternoon after we got back from Disney World. We were all exhausted, and I was sitting on the couch scrolling through my phone when Sophie came in. She sat next to me and started poking fun at me for no reason. I tried to ignore her, but she just kept going, calling me boring, saying my friends were losers. Finally, I snapped back and told her to mind her own business. What I didn't expect was how far Sophie would take this. She threw a tantrum and ran to her mom, crying about how I'd been bullying her. My stepmom, Rachel, didn't even ask for my side of the story. She came storming into the living room, yelling at me for being mean to Sophie. I tried to explain, but it didn't matter. It was clear who Rachel believed. The real trouble started the next morning. Sophie had been giving me the silent treatment, which I honestly didn't mind. But then I overheard her whispering to her mom that she thought I was hiding something. At first, I didn't think much of it. Sophie is dramatic about everything. But at dinner that night, she dropped a bombshell in front of my dad. Emily's been sneaking out, Sophie announced, looking straight at me with this smug grin. I think she's doing drugs. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. What are you talking about? I shot back. Oh, come on, Emily, she said, her voice dripping with fake innocence. I saw those texts on your phone. You were talking about meeting up with someone last week. Now, here's the thing. Sophie didn't have access to my phone. She must have made the whole thing up. But my dad and Rachel exchanged these worried glances, and I knew they were starting to believe her. Is this true, Emily? Dad asked, his voice tight. No, I said, feeling my face heat up. I don't know what she's talking about. I haven't done anything. Sophie just shrugged, acting like she was trying to help. I'm just saying, maybe you should check her phone. You don't know what she's been up to. At that point, I was furious. I slammed my fork down on the table and stormed off to my room. But the damage was done. My dad followed me and demanded to see my phone. I handed it over, figuring he'd see there was nothing suspicious on it, and dropped the whole thing. But Sophie had planted a seed of doubt, and now my own dad was treating me like some kind of criminal. The next few days were tense. Sophie was still ignoring me, but that wasn't the worst of it. Somehow, she convinced the neighbor kids we'd met at the beach to spread rumors about me. I didn't even know these kids well, but they started whispering whenever I walked by. By the end of the week, the story had grown. Apparently, I wasn't just a drug addict, I was also a prostitute. When I found out, I was mortified. Who in their right mind would believe this nonsense? But Sophie was loving it. She'd act all sweet and innocent around the adults, then give me these smug little looks when no one was watching. I tried telling my dad what was going on, but he brushed it off. Sophie's just a kid, he said. She doesn't mean any harm. Didn't mean any harm? She was ruining my reputation. By the time we got back home, I felt like my whole world had been turned upside down. My dad was distant, Rachel was colder than usual, and Sophie was acting like she'd won some kind of competition. The worst part is, I don't know how to fix this. My dad says he believes me, but I can tell he has his doubts. And Sophie? She's gotten away with everything. I'm stuck living under the same roof as someone who's actively trying to destroy me, and I don't know how to make it stop. What should I do? Hi again. I wish I didn't have to write this, but things have gone from bad to worse. If you read my first post, you'll know that my half-sister, Sophie, spread some disgusting lies about me during a family vacation. She claimed I was doing drugs and even called me a prostitute. I thought the nightmare would end when we got home, but I was so wrong. My dad, Mark and stepmom, Linda, completely believed Sophie. I don't know why. I've never given them a reason to doubt me. But Sophie's manipulation worked like a charm. The first week back was unbearable. Every time I walked into a room, conversations would stop. My dad started making these offhand comments about my behavior. You know, Emily, he'd say, looking at me over his coffee cup. You're not going to ruin this family with your recklessness. Recklessness? I hadn't done anything. I'd try to defend myself, but he'd just shake his head like I was some rebellious teenager who didn't know better. Linda was even worse. She started watching me like a hawk. One day, I was in my room, doing homework, when Linda barged in without knocking. "What are you hiding?" she demanded. I scanning my desk like I was running a drug cartel out of my bedroom. "Nothing," I said, throwing my hands up. "What is wrong with you?" She snatched my phone off the desk and started scrolling through it. Of course, she didn't find anything, but that didn't stop her from muttering, "I know you're up to something." It was like living in a prison. I couldn't go anywhere without being questioned. If I left the house, Linda would interrogate me when I got back. "Where were you? Who were you with? Did you take anything?" The constant suspicion was breaking me, but the final straw came about 2 weeks later. It was a Friday night, and I was supposed to be babysitting for our neighbors, the Hendersons. They'd hired me before, and they trusted me. I was excited for the break from home, but just as I was about to leave, Sophie pulled one of her stunts. She walked into the living room, crying crocodile tears, and said, "I don't think Emily should be babysitting. What if she steals something? Or hurts the kids?" Linda gasped like Sophie had just revealed the secret to world peace. "That's a good point," she said, turning to my dad. "Are you serious?" I shouted, "You're not going to let me babysit because of Sophie's lies?" My dad looked at me, then at Sophie and said, "Until you prove you can be responsible, you're staying home." I lost it. Prove I can be responsible? I'm not the one lying to everyone. That led to a screaming match. My dad accused me of being ungrateful, disrespectful, and, get this, a bad influence on Sophie. Linda stood there nodding like a bobblehead, while Sophie smirked behind her. Finally, my dad said, "If you can't live by our rules, maybe you shouldn't live here at all." I froze. "What are you saying?" "You heard me," he said. "Pack your things and go." I couldn't believe it. "You're kicking me out?" "Over Sophie's lies." But he didn't back down. "You have 1 hour," he said. "Take what you need and leave." I ran to my room, shaking with anger and disbelief. I tried calling my mom, but she didn't pick up. She lives in another state, and we're not super close. I was on my own. Linda followed me upstairs and stood in the doorway, watching as I packed. "Make sure you don't take anything that doesn't belong to you," she said coldly. I wanted to scream, but I held it together. I grabbed my backpack, stuffed in some clothes, my laptop, and a few personal things, and left. I didn't know where to go. It was late, and I didn't have much money. I ended up calling my friend Jenna. She and I have been close since middle school, and her family is amazing. When I told her what happened, she was horrified. "Come over," she said. "My parents will understand." Her dad, Mr. Collins, even came to pick me up. On the drive to their house, he kept shaking his head and saying, "I can't believe your own family would do this to you." The Collinses welcomed me with open arms. They set me up in their guest room and told me I could stay as long as I needed. For the first time in weeks, I felt safe. But the relief didn't last long. The next morning, I woke up to a barrage of texts from Linda. "Where are you? You need to come back and apologize. Your dad is furious with you." I ignored them. But then Sophie chimed in. "I hope you're happy. You've ruined everything." Ruined everything? I was the one who got kicked out. Jenna's mom, Mrs. Collins, sat me down and said, "Emily, I know this is hard, but you can't let them manipulate you. You did nothing wrong." She was right, but it was still hard. I kept thinking about how my dad had sided with Sophie over me. My own father. A few days later, things got even worse. I found out from Jenna's little brother, Max, that Sophie had been telling kids at school that I'd run away because I got caught selling drugs. When I heard that, I nearly lost it. I wanted to march over to my dad's house and confront her. But what was the point? She'd just play the victim like always. Instead, I focused on trying to rebuild my life. The Collinses helped me figure out a plan. I'm looking for a part-time job, and I've been staying on top of my schoolwork. But every day, I'm haunted by what happened. How do you move on when your own family turns against you? Hi, it's Emily again. I didn't think my life could get any more chaotic after being kicked out of my own home, but the past few months have been a roller coaster. After staying with my friend Jenna's family for a couple of weeks, I realized I couldn't keep relying on them forever. They were kind and supportive, but I didn't want to overstay my welcome. The first hurdle was finding a place to live. I didn't have much saved, just a few $100s from babysitting and odd jobs. I scoured online listings for anything I could afford and finally found a tiny studio apartment on the edge of town. It was barely big enough for a bed and a small table, but it was mine. When I moved in, I felt a strange mix of freedom and dread. The walls were bare, and the whole place smelled faintly of mildew, but at least I wasn't being constantly accused of things I hadn't done. That first night, I lay awake on the cheap air mattress I'd bought and wondered if I'd made the right choice. Money was tight, so I picked up a part-time job at a local diner called Ruby's. The work was exhausting, long shifts on my feet, dealing with grumpy customers, but the paycheck kept the lights on. My manager, Carla, was tough but fair. She took one look at me on my first day and said, "You're young, but you've got grit. You'll do fine here." At first, I tried to keep to myself, but my coworkers quickly pulled me into their little circle. There was Maria, a single mom with a wicked sense of humor, Jake, the college dropout who was always cracking jokes, and Tiffany, who treated every shift like it was a runway show. They made the long hours bearable, and I started to feel like I had a new kind of family. But even as I adjusted to my new life, Sophie's lies continued to haunt me. One night, I was cleaning tables when a group of teenagers came in. They were laughing and taking selfies, but as soon as one of them spotted me, the mood shifted. "Hey, isn't that the girl Sophie was talking about?" One of them whispered loudly. I froze, my face burning. I didn't know these kids, but apparently, Sophie's rumors had spread far and wide. "Yeah, that's her," another one said, smirking. "Guess she's not selling drugs anymore, just serving burgers." I wanted to crawl under the table. Instead, I plastered on a fake smile and kept working. But inside, I was boiling with anger. How could Sophie still be ruining my life when I wasn't even living under the same roof anymore? The turning point came a few weeks later. I was leaving work late one night when a guy approached me in the parking lot. He looked familiar, but I couldn't place him at first. "Emily, right?" he said, shoving his hands into his jacket pockets. "I'm Ryan. I used to date Sophie." That's when it clicked. I'd seen him around before, back when Sophie was parading him around like a trophy. "What do you want?" I asked, crossing my arms. I wasn't in the mood for another confrontation. I thought you should know the truth," he said, his voice low. "About everything Sophie said." I raised an eyebrow. "What truth?" Ryan sighed and looked down at his feet. "She made it all up. The drugs, the prostitution, none of it was true. She was just jealous." I stared at him, stunned. "Jealous? Of what?" He hesitated, then said, "You. She couldn't stand that guys were paying more attention to you than to her. She told me herself. It was her way of getting back at you." For a moment, I couldn't speak. All the pain and humiliation I'd endured over the past few months came rushing back. "Why are you telling me this now?" I finally asked. "Because I feel guilty," Ryan admitted. "I went along with her lies at first, but I didn't realize how far she'd take it. And when I saw you tonight, I had to say something. I didn't know whether to thank him or scream at him. Part of me wanted to march straight to my dad's house and shove the truth in their faces. But as I stood there in the cold parking lot, I realized something. It wouldn't matter. Even if I told them what Ryan had said, they wouldn't believe me. Sophie would cry and play the victim, and my dad and Linda would keep siding with her. No matter what I did, I'd always be the scapegoat. So, I thanked Ryan for telling me and went home. I didn't cry that night. I'd already shed too many tears over this. Instead, I focused on moving forward. Living independently hasn't been easy. I've had to budget every penny and juggle work with school. There have been nights when I've gone to bed hungry because I couldn't afford groceries. But for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm in control of my own life. I've also started seeing a therapist, thanks to Maria from work. She noticed I was struggling and recommended someone she knew. Talking to a professional has helped me process everything that's happened. As for my family, I've decided to keep my distance. I don't see the point in trying to rebuild relationships with people who didn't stand by me when I needed them most. Maybe one day, things will change, but for now, I'm focusing on myself. Life isn't perfect, but it's mine. And for now, that's enough. Hi again. It feels surreal to write this, but after everything I've been through, I'm finally in a good place. I didn't think I'd ever find peace, let alone happiness. But life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. It all started about a year after I moved into that tiny apartment. I was still working at Ruby's Diner and attending community college. My days were a blur of studying and waiting tables, but I didn't mind. I was determined to make something of myself. One Friday night, we were unusually busy. A group of college kids came in, loud and full of energy, and I was assigned their table. As I approached with my notepad, one of the guys turned and smiled at me, a warm, genuine smile that made me pause for a second. "Hi," he said, looking up at me. "I'm Alex. What's your name?" I was so used to dealing with rude or impatient customers that his kindness caught me off guard. Emily," I said, blushing slightly. The group ordered a mountain of food, and Alex made a point to chat with me every time I came back to their table. He asked about my classes, my job, and even noticed the necklace I was wearing, a simple silver locket my mom had given me years ago. When they finally left, Alex slipped me a note with his tip. It wasn't a creepy pickup line or anything, just his number and a little message. "You seem amazing. Let's grab coffee sometime?" I hesitated at first. After everything with Sophie and my family, I'd built some serious walls around myself, but something about Alex felt different. So, a few days later, I texted him. Our first coffee date turned into hours of talking. Alex was studying engineering and had this quiet confidence that put me at ease. He told me about his own struggles. His parents had divorced when he was young, and he'd worked 2 jobs to afford college. He understood what it meant to fight for a better life. We started seeing each other regularly, and for the first time in years, I felt genuinely happy. Alex didn't just listen to me. He supported me in ways I didn't even know I needed. When I told him about Sophie and my family, he didn't judge or try to offer easy solutions. He just held my hand and said, "You didn't deserve any of that." After a year of dating, Alex proposed. It wasn't some grand gesture, just the 2 of us sitting on a blanket by the lake where we'd had our first real date. He pulled out a simple ring and said, "Emily, you've been through so much, but you've never let it break you. I want to build a life with you, one where you never have to feel alone again. Will you marry me?" I said yes, of course. Planning the wedding was a mix of excitement and stress. We decided to keep it small, just close friends and family. But when it came time to write the guest list, I hit a wall. Alex noticed I was tense one night as we sat at the kitchen table with our lists. "What's wrong?" he asked. I sighed. "It's my family. I don't know if I should invite them." Alex reached for my hand. "It's your day, Emily. You don't owe anyone an invitation, especially if they've hurt you." I nodded, but the decision wasn't that simple. Deep down, I still wanted some kind of reconciliation with my dad, Mark. Despite everything, he was my father, and a part of me hoped he'd finally see the truth. In the end, I decided to invite Mark and Linda, but not Sophie. I knew it would be controversial, but I wasn't willing to let her ruin another chapter of my life. When I sent the invitations, I braced myself for backlash. Sure enough, it came. Linda called me the next day, her voice sharp. "How could you not invite Sophie?" she demanded. "She's the reason I had to leave in the first place," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is my wedding, Linda. I want it to be about love, not lies." "Well, if Sophie isn't invited, maybe we shouldn't come either," she snapped. That hurt more than I expected. "That's your choice," I said quietly. For weeks, I didn't hear from them. I tried to focus on the positive, choosing flowers, finding the perfect dress, but their silence loomed over me. Then, a week before the wedding, Mark called. "Emily," he said, his voice hesitant. "Linda and I talked. and we've decided to come. We don't want to miss this." I should have been happy, but something about his tone felt off. I thanked him anyway and hoped for the best. The wedding day was beautiful. We held the ceremony in a small garden, surrounded by friends and Alex's family. When Mark and Linda arrived, I felt a pang of nervousness. They were polite but distant, and I couldn't shake the feeling that they were only there out of obligation. During the reception, I saw them talking quietly in the corner, their expressions unreadable. They didn't stay long, leaving before we even cut the cake. It wasn't the reconciliation I'd hoped for, but as I stood there with Alex, watching our friends laugh and dance, I realized something important. I didn't need their approval to be happy. This was my new life, and for the first time, it felt like my own. Hi again. I wish I could say that my wedding brought closure or healing with my family, but instead, it was the breaking point. It's strange how one moment can redefine your relationships forever. A few months before the wedding, as Alex and I were finalizing the guest list, I made the decision not to invite Sophie. It wasn't an easy choice. I knew it would cause drama, but I couldn't risk her turning my wedding into another spectacle. Alex supported me completely. "This day is about us, not anyone else," he said, holding my hand as I agonized over the list. The backlash came faster than I expected. A week after the invitations went out, Mark called me. His voice was sharp, the kind of tone he used when he wanted to make sure I knew I was disappointing him. "Emily, we need to talk," he said without so much as a hello. "Okay," I said, already bracing myself. "I saw the guest list," he said. "You didn't invite Sophie." "That's right," I replied, trying to stay calm. "I thought about it a lot, but after everything that's happened, I don't think it's the right decision." There was a long silence on the other end. Then he said, "If Sophie's not invited, I won't be coming either." The words hit me like a punch in the stomach. "What?" "You heard me," he said. "Sophie is part of this family, and if you're going to exclude her, you're excluding all of us." I felt my chest tighten. "Dad, do you even realize why I made this decision? Sophie lied about me. She ruined my life. And you believed her over me." "I don't want to get into that again," he said dismissively. "What's done is done. But this is your wedding, and you're supposed to bring the family together, not tear it apart." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're really going to make this about Sophie? On my wedding day?" "This is your choice, Emily," he said. "But if you leave Sophie out, you're leaving us out too." I hung up the phone without saying goodbye. I sat there for a long time, staring at the wall, replaying the conversation in my head. It wasn't just about Sophie anymore. It was about all the years of being overlooked, blamed, and doubted. When Alex came home that night, he found me sitting on the couch, tears streaming down my face. "What happened?" he asked, kneeling in front of me. I told him everything. "He's giving me an ultimatum," I said, my voice shaking. "Either I invite Sophie or he won't come." Alex's expression darkened. "Emily, you don't deserve this. He's trying to manipulate you, just like always." I nodded, but the pain of it still stung. I wanted him to be there," I said quietly. Alex took my hands in his. "I know you did. But this day is about us, and we don't need anyone there who can't respect that." In the days that followed, I wrestled with my decision. Part of me wanted to give in, to invite Sophie just to keep the peace. But every time I thought about it, I remembered the countless times I'd bent over backward for my dad's approval and how it had never been enough. Finally, I called him back. "Dad," I said, my voice steady, "I've made my decision. Sophie isn't invited, and if that means you won't come, then so be it." He didn't try to argue this time. "I hope you know what you're doing," he said coldly before hanging up. The weeks leading up to the wedding were bittersweet. On one hand, I was excited to start my life with Alex. On the other, I couldn't shake the sadness of knowing my dad wouldn't be there. Linda texted me a few times, trying to guilt-trip me into changing my mind, but I ignored her. The wedding day was beautiful. It was held in a small garden, surrounded by friends and Alex's family. As I walked down the aisle, I felt a mix of emotions, joy, love, and a twinge of sadness for the family that wasn't there. But as I looked into Alex's eyes, all the pain melted away. In that moment, I realized that I didn't need my father's approval to be happy. I was building a new family with someone who truly loved and supported me. After the wedding, I made the decision to cut ties with my dad and Linda completely. It wasn't an easy choice, but it felt like the only way to protect myself. I blocked their numbers and stopped responding to their messages. A few months later, I heard through a mutual acquaintance that Sophie was still spreading lies about me. This time, though, I didn't let it get to me. I was done letting her have power over my life. Alex and I have since moved to a new city, where we're building a life together. I've started a new job, and we're even talking about starting a family of our own someday. It's not always easy, but for the first time, I feel like I'm in control of my own happiness. Cutting off my father was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but it was also the most freeing. Sometimes, the only way to heal is to let go of the people who hurt you, even if they're family. I didn't think I'd ever hear from my father or Linda after the wedding, but life has a way of throwing curveballs. I thought I'd moved on, building a life with Alex in a new city, but the past has a way of creeping back in when you least expect it. It started with a phone call. I was at work, finalizing a presentation for a potential client, when my phone buzzed. I didn't recognize the number, so I let it go to voicemail. During my lunch break, I decided to check it out. "Emily, it's your father. I know we haven't spoken, but this is important. It's about Sophie. Call me back." My stomach dropped. It had been over a year since we last spoke, and now he was calling about Sophie? I debated ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. I called him back after work, dreading what he might say. He picked up on the first ring. "Emily," he said, his voice tired and strained. "Thank you for calling. What's going on?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "It's Sophie," he said, sighing heavily. "She's in trouble." I didn't say anything, waiting for him to continue. "She's been using drugs," he said finally. "We didn't know how bad it was until she tried to." He trailed off, his voice breaking. "Tried to what?" I pressed, though I already knew where this was going. "She tried to kill herself," he said, barely above a whisper. "She's in a rehabilitation center now, but it's bad, Emily. She's not doing well." I felt a mix of emotions, shock, sadness, and if I'm honest, a twinge of anger. After everything Sophie had put me through, she was the one who ended up falling apart? "Why are you telling me this?" I asked after a long pause. "Because we need you," he said. "Linda and I are struggling. We don't know how to handle this, and we thought maybe you could help." I let out a bitter laugh before I could stop myself. "Help? You want my help? After you kicked me out of the house and chose Sophie over me?" "Emily, please," he said, his voice pleading. "I know we've made mistakes, but this is your sister. She needs her family right now. She needed her family when she was spreading lies about me." I shot back. Where was my support then? Mark didn't have an answer. "I'm not asking you to forgive us," he said finally. "I'm just asking you to think about Sophie. She's in a really dark place, Emily. She needs you." I ended the call without giving him an answer. That night, I told Alex about the conversation. He listened patiently, as always, then asked, "What do you want to do?" "I don't know," I admitted. "A part of me feels guilty for not helping, but another part of me, I just can't go back to that toxic environment." "You don't owe them anything," Alex said firmly. "Not after the way they treated you." Still, I couldn't stop thinking about Sophie. As much as I resented her, I didn't want her to suffer. The next day, I called Jenna, my oldest and closest friend. She'd been there for me through everything and always knew how to give it to me straight. "Don't do it," she said the moment I finished explaining. "Why not?" I asked. "Because it's not your job to fix them," she said. "They didn't care about you when you needed help, and now they're only coming to you because they're desperate. Don't let them drag you back into their mess." She was right. I knew she was right, but the guilt still lingered. A week later, I got another call, this time from Linda. "Emily," she said, her voice trembling. "Please, we're begging you. Sophie is asking for you." That stopped me in my tracks. "She's asking for me?" "Yes," Linda said quickly. "She keeps saying she wants to apologize, that she needs to make things right with you." I didn't know what to believe. Was Sophie genuinely remorseful, or was this just another ploy? "I need time to think," I said finally. Linda sighed but didn't argue. Okay, but please don't take too long. She really needs you. For days, I wrestled with the decision. I even considered visiting Sophie at the rehab center just to hear what she had to say. But every time I imagined seeing her again, I felt that old anger bubbling to the surface. In the end, I decided not to go. I sent a message to Mark, making it clear that I wasn't willing to reopen old wounds. I'm sorry Sophie is going through this, I wrote, but I've worked too hard to find peace in my life, and I can't risk losing it. I hope she gets the help she needs, but I won't be coming back. He never replied. It's been a few months since then, and I still think about Sophie sometimes. I wonder if she's doing better, if she's finally taking responsibility for her actions. But I've made my choice, and I don't regret it. Sometimes, the hardest thing to do is walk away. But for me, it was the only way to heal. Hi everyone. I don't know where to start, but I wanted to share how things finally came to an end with my family. For years, I kept hoping that something would change, that my dad, Linda, or even Sophie would see how much pain they caused me. But after everything, I realized I needed to stop waiting for apologies that would never come. After I refused to get involved with Sophie's rehabilitation, I thought I'd feel guilty forever. Mark and Linda made it clear that they thought I was heartless for not supporting them. But as the weeks passed, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, relief. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for the next call or text that would drag me back into their chaos. I wasn't constantly replaying old arguments in my head or wondering if I could have done something differently. I was finally free to focus on my own happiness. Alex and I had settled into our new home, a small but cozy place just outside the city. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. We spent weekends decorating, painting walls, and turning it into a space that felt like a fresh start. One Saturday morning, as I was unpacking a box of old photos, I came across a picture of my dad and me from when I was little. It was taken at the park near our old house. I was on the swings, laughing, and he was pushing me, smiling like I was his whole world. Looking at that photo, I felt a pang of sadness. There was a time when my dad loved me unconditionally, when I didn't have to fight for his attention or approval. But that time was gone, and I had to accept that the father I'd once known didn't exist anymore. Alex found me sitting on the floor, staring at the picture. "What's that?" he asked, kneeling beside me. "Just an old memory," I said, handing it to him. He studied it for a moment before setting it aside. "You've been through so much, Emily," he said gently, "but you're not that little girl anymore. You're stronger now." He was right. For years, I've been holding on to the hope that I could fix my family, but it was time to let go. The final break came a few months later. I was at work when Linda sent me a long email. She wrote about Sophie's progress in rehab, how she was a changed person and wanted to rebuild our relationship. Linda urged me to give Sophie another chance, saying it was time to put the past behind us. I read the email 3 times, trying to decide how to respond. Part of me wanted to believe it, to think that Sophie had truly changed and that we could finally move forward. But deep down, I knew better. Sophie might have been working on herself, but that didn't erase the years of pain she'd caused me. And even if she was sincere, I wasn't willing to put myself back in a position where I could be hurt again. I replied with a short, polite message. "Linda, I'm glad to hear Sophie is doing better. I wish her the best, but I've moved on from that chapter of my life. Please respect my decision to maintain distance." I blocked her email after that. As for Mark, I hadn't heard from him since my refusal to help with Sophie's rehab. I'd thought about reaching out, but every time, I stopped myself. I knew he'd never see me as more than an extension of Sophie's drama, and I didn't want to spend the rest of my life being treated like a problem he needed to solve. It wasn't easy cutting ties completely. There were moments when I felt like a terrible person for walking away. But Alex reminded me that protecting my peace wasn't selfish, it was necessary. Over time, I started to rebuild my sense of self. I threw myself into my work, earning a promotion that I never thought I'd achieve so soon. Alex and I began planning our future together, dreaming about traveling, starting a family, and building a life that was completely ours. One of the biggest milestones came when we decided to host a small dinner party for our friends. It was the first time I'd let people into my new world, and it felt like a celebration of how far I'd come. That night, as we sat around the table, laughing and sharing stories, I realized how much lighter I felt. For so long, I'd carried the weight of my family's dysfunction, letting it define who I was. But now, I was surrounded by people who loved and respected me for who I am, not who they wanted me to be. Alex raised a glass and said, "To Emily, the strongest person I know. Here's to leaving the past behind and building the future we deserve." Tears welled up in my eyes as everyone clinked their glasses. For the first time, I truly felt like I'd moved on. Since then, life has only gotten better. Alex and I are planning a trip to Europe, a dream I never thought I'd be able to afford. We've also started talking about having kids someday, though we're in no rush. As for my family, I haven't looked back. I don't know if Mark or Linda will ever understand why I made the choices I did, and honestly, it doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that I've finally found peace. I've built a life that's free of toxic influences, surrounded by love and support. And for the first time in a long time, I'm excited for the future. To anyone reading this who's struggling with toxic family relationships, I want you to know that it's okay to walk away. It's okay to prioritize your happiness and well-being, even if it means cutting ties with people who should have loved you unconditionally. You deserve peace. You deserve happiness. And sometimes, the only way to find it is to let go.